Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm coming to you today from Huntersville, North Carolina, which is just outside of Charlotte, about 14 miles north of Charlotte, 4 to 5 miles from Davidson. I'm helping my oldest daughter move. She's moving with my youngest daughter. Karis is moving with Joy. It's really been great. Joy came down from Raleigh to help, so we've been able to hang out together. It's been a lot of fun. Earlier this week, I stopped off for several days in South Carolina, both at Clemson and Wofford, to tour those places. But today we have something a little special for you. You know, the biggest challenge that you face when you do college counseling independently is parents having unrealistic expectations. And it's a constant challenge to strike the right balance between being completely honest with a student and a parent and a family about their chances at a school, particularly when they've set their mind on unrealistic options, and you have plenty of experience and data to show that, but you don't want to deflate the kid. You don't want to have kids be discouraged and dispirited. It's the hardest part about this job. And you also don't want to discourage somebody from applying to a school that they have a legitimate shot at. So this is the biggest challenge Julia faces. This is the biggest challenge I face. And so the two of us got together and we had about a 40-minute conversation on who is the student that really does have a shot at these ultra uber selective schools versus the student that has the grades, has the rigor, has the scores, but is not likely to experience success at the highest level. And so Julie and I are going to just discuss this question over the next 2 weeks on Monday's episodes. But before we transition to that, I want to thank every single person who's ever given us a donation, whether it's $5 or a couple of people have given us $1,000. And we have some monthly donors who have been supporting us for 4 years and have never missed. And in some cases, they have given over $1,000 when you add it all up. And I was just running the math and I was curious. So I looked up, on average, how much time is taken in a 60-minute show on commercials? And I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. I found out that it's 3/8 of the show. I mean, in a typical 60-minute show, between 16 to 18 minutes of that 60 minutes is commercials. So, I mean, you're talking about between 25 and 30% of the show. And then I just went back and looked at the fact that we have, 500 hours, more than 500 hours of content. And I realized that is way, way over 125 hours of commercials that one of us would have been subject to. But because we have generous people who believe in what we're doing and just want pure, straight content, uninterrupted, we've been able now, 6.5 years into the show, be able to not run a single commercial ever. And I don't think we can thank our podcast partners enough. There'll be an update that will be going up by late September of all of the new podcast partners that we have onto our website. It's one other way we want to thank them. And I will forever be grateful anytime we ever get a donation, whether it's $5 or $500. I'm just really thankful because not only do we get commercial-free content, but it's allowed us to expand and do a number of other things, including build out a nice website. And it doesn't cover all of our costs, but it's been covering about 70% of our costs. And we are forever grateful, and I can't thank you enough. I don't want to mention you all by name because I know that's probably be boring to those who haven't given, and some people don't even want their names mentioned. But you know who I'm speaking to, and I just want to give you a big hearty thank you. All right, so at this point, we're going to transition to my conversation with Julia about selective admissions. And then after that, you'll hear the last part of Lisa's interview with Brian Bertges, the executive director of Delta Theta Chi, one of the leading fraternities, and they're talking about tough questions about fraternities. Hey, Julia.
Hi, Mark.
I'm excited to talk to you today about what's a really difficult topic.
Mm-hmm.
It's something Julia and I constantly encounter, and that is parents and students with unrealistic expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a hard topic because I remember this conversation I had with a mom who used to listen all the time to our podcast. And she said she stopped listening to another podcast and she started listening to ours because the other one was stressing her out. And I don't want to stress people out in this conversation. And it has potential to do that. And I don't want that to happen. Instead, I want to prepare people because to me, what's really stressful is when all the decisions come in and your kid doesn't get in and you're shocked and you don't understand why.
Right.
That's where the real stress occurs and there's not a lot you can do about it. So I didn't want to do that. But what I want to have a conversation with Julie about today is when we see kids with really, really high statistics. So we're talking about like ACT 3536, SAT north of 1550, 1580, 1590, all that stuff. Really high GPAs and really good rigor.
Mm-hmm.
So they're taking all the advanced curriculum. And I know, Julia, you guys have moved away from testing. So I probably see a lot more AP scores than you do. But,
yes,
I see a lot of kids with like lots and lots of fives, and fives. There is a time that kid is really competitive at the most selective schools. And there's another time when they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're trying to talk to families who are really aspirational and they say, look at my kid, they're top of their class, look at their testing, look at their grades. I think we need to apply to XYZ designer school. And they tend to have the most selective schools in the country on their list.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Julie and I tried to prepare them for the fact, like we sense that they're kind of expecting to get in.
Yes.
We don't want them to be devastated. So we try to provide some guidance. Like, this is not a school that you can count on. And, a lot of times they're really like just gobsmacked. Like, what more could my kid possibly do? Like,
Mm-hmm.
Look at their grades, look at their testing, look at their curriculum. Like, we want to sort of talk about that student versus the student where they have all of that academic oomph. And we actually think you actually are someone that has a chance at competing at the most selective schools in the country. What is the difference between those two? And so I'll go first, Julia, and just throw out some things from my observations. And then I'd love for you to either throw in anything I haven't said that resonates with you, or if you want to comment on any sort of my categories. Does that work?
Yes.
The first one I don't want to talk about too much because I feel like we've talked about it a lot, and that's the hooked applicant.
Right.
But it is so many of those kids that we actually do think it's the majority.
Yes.
The majority of them are hooked when we're going to get really optimistic. And so what am I talking about? Hooked applicant, regular listeners know, but we always get new listeners all the time. So let's just talk about not all hooks are equal. Some of the hooks we're referring to here are going to be athletic recruit. That's going to be the biggest category. That's going to be the most spots and the one that can carry the most weight. Even that is divided up. If it's in a revenue producing sports versus non-revenue, then this kid needs to be stronger. But tons and tons of kids are getting in that way. So that's one. The development or the advancement, person that can give a really big gift, that's one. The celebrity kid, schools just get tons of publicity by able to say such movie star or politician or whatever is at their school, which makes it easier for them to recruit. That's another one. Faculty kid is another one. We realize not all schools, especially some public schools like the UCs, don't give any faculty thumb on the scale, but a lot of schools do, especially in the private school realm. I'm sure there's some, but I can't think of, nobody's coming to mind for me for a private where it's not at least some advantage to be a faculty kid.
Right.
And then the other thing that comes to mind is unique compositional diversity. And that could be a lot of things. It could be, we don't have anybody from Wyoming or North Dakota, and you allow us to go from 45 to 46 states. Or a lot of the kids you worked with at College Horizons, we have so few kids in our native pool that's going to add unique diversity. Of course, we've talked about affirmative action, and we know different schools are going to handle that differently. Even this year, some are going to be more conservative. Some are going to be, hey, as long as you can say how your race has impacted you, then we're going to consider it. And that's on racial diversity. It can be racial. It can be geographic diversity. It could be gender diversity. So that's when I'm using that term compositional diversity kind of as a catch-all for that. And it could even be socioeconomic if a school has a real initiative on to, for more first gen, more Pell, that's a priority. And then not that it's a major, but it certainly can be for schools on the other side. If it's a priority for full pay families and they're need aware, then that certainly can help on the other side of the economic ladder. And so, and then high level arts talent as well. That certainly can be one high level dancer, high level orchestra, soloist, different things like that. So that's one category. We've talked about that a lot, and it's most spots would go there because there's a lot of different buckets there. But a lot of kids don't have that we see. And they still say, but look at my high test scores. Look at what more could I possibly have done? How can you tell me that these schools are not likely? I'm not saying don't apply, but understand they're not likely. The first thing I want to say, I've said this before a lot, Julie, you'll probably hear me say this. There's 43,000 schools in the country. That means there's 86,000 kids, number one or number two. Think of an entire football stadium full. There's an entire huge football stadium full of just number one and number two kids in the country. And keep in mind, it's a big world out there. And guess what? The people in India, the people in Canada, the people in Nigeria, the people in China, and in the rest of the world, they tend to go for that same group of 20 to 30 schools that everybody covets and shoots after. So just that's something to keep in mind. But what are the other areas? So here are the other things that I have found. One category would be just that truly unique level of scholar that schools rarely come across. And even within super smart kids, you are just at a whole different level. And this is one that oftentimes will be communicated as, in my 20 or 30 years of teaching, this is the best ever, this is the most extraordinary ever, not just your valedictorian this year, or your
right,
just that. So I would say that can be a category as long as the character, it looks like you have good character and everything. Another, it's not quite a bucket that somebody falls into uniquely when it comes to all of those hooks. But I would say that their extracurriculars have a very far-reaching impact. It's like when Stanford told me when I was out there in 2019 for a week of training. I'm not going to say this publicly at an info session, but we'll tell you guys this as counselors. Don't just send us kids that have impact in their school or in their region. Tell us kids who have statewide, national, and international impact in their reach of their extracurriculars.
Right.
It might not be a natural, like a hook that just fits in, like, oh, you're going to be on the lacrosse team, like that. But a couple of kids that come to mind for me this last year, they both were ranked 7th in the country. One was ranked 7th in comedy, and one was
right.
7th in debate. And they're both going to like the elites of the elites. And listen, they had all the other stuff, right? They had the grades, they had the scores, they had the testing, they had good writing, they had good recs, they had all that other stuff. But I'm sure the impact and the reach of their extracurriculars was a positive in their candidacy when you looked at sort of the assessment of, oh, this is a big fish. This is somebody that's really having significant impact out there. So that would be another category that I would have. And then another one that comes to mind is the whole distance travel concept. So the person that has just really come a super long way, like they grew up in an orphanage or they were homeless for a while, or just both of their parents have 6th grade educations, and look at what they have accomplished. Because I don't think we can emphasize enough, Julia, that especially how these selective schools that do holistic admissions, they are going to look at a kid's accomplishments through the prism of the advantages that they have gotten from their parents.
Right.
And so when they see high achievement, they're going to take a look at the parents and say, what is the level of wealth? What is the education that the parents have had? And if they see significant education, doctor, MBA, lawyer, they can tell by the professions there's a lot of money. They're going to say, this kid has been in the best schools their whole life, gone to the best enrichment programs, done everything over the summer, all these summer programs, had tutors, had exposure, been exposed to highly educated people. We're going to take a lot of those kids. Most of the schools are comprised of kids like that. But just know that, if they get what they would regard as maybe similar kinds of accomplishments without as much advantage, that other kid that's had less advantage is going to stand out. And then the last thing that comes to mind, and this is harder the more we get into, like, are we talking about the 3 to 5 most selective or like the 20 or 25 most selective? Because there is a difference between Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT. And then when you get into other really selective schools like WashU and, and Northwestern and, like really selective schools, but they're not like that tippy top of the top in terms of hard to get in. I think that sometimes when a kid has all of, like, a lot of the really strong, all the metrics are there as far as the numbers. And there's a couple different kinds of kids, I think, and especially if you can combine the two. One is the kid is just interesting and unique. Like they just are so interesting, the kinds of things they're involved in. And schools are looking for interesting kids that are unique and stand out. And like, we kind of know it when we see it. I think of the student I'm working with who's been ranked in the top 50 in competitive rock climbing every year and does these really, really, really cool things. And then has also started a number of initiatives. And the kid just is going to pop off the page on the interesting factor.
Yes.
And then the last one I can think of, and once again, I think this is hardest at the very tip of the top selectivity, but if it's the only thing they have and not in conjunction with others, that's just the person that they have so impacted the space at the place where they are. Maybe they don't have statewide extracurriculars, but every teacher just describes them as, our school's not going to be the same when this person leaves. And it's a combination of the personal qualities that they have and the degree to which they positively elevated like every single sort of thing they were involved in. That kid has a chance to pop as well. So those are my kind of things I thought about. I'd love to know if you either have any others you thought of, or if there's anything you want to comment about any of the ones that I shared. Because you and I know there's a tremendous difference between two kids and they both have 1590s in top of their class and 8 APs and really rigorous courses. And one of them we look at and we kind of know that, first of all, in the most competitive schools, it's really kind of hard to stand out just by your scores. Like they're seeing a wave of that. I'm gonna ask you a question, Julia. You have 180 kids in your graduating class.
190.
Somewhere around there?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, 190. And you're just one school. How many of your kids would you say have 1,500 plus SATs or 34 ACTs?
Probably close to a quarter of the class, maybe more.
Right, so that's probably 50 plus. So that's just one school.
Yes.
So anyway, I talked a lot for like a while. I want to hear your thoughts.
I completely agree with you. There is, so as part of what we get to do as a school-based counselor is we get to talk to the colleges that our students apply to, and also get to see the fullness of the class as well too. So even if a student might singularly look strong, right, and especially I think this is where parents have a hard time. It makes sense. We're all very myopic. We're myopic within our environment, within our families, things like that. So when you're looking at just one person, they have all these pieces, you're like, oh, wow. Yeah. Right. Like, how could this not happen? Whereas, you and I are privy to a wider, sample of what a lot of the Ivy Leagues use or call as standard strong applicants. So this is still a very competitive applicant in the sense that you've got these scores, you've got good extracurriculars, you're like a fine young person. And you've done nothing wrong. You've done everything right. And just as you said, Mark, there is over a football stadium made up of these students. I know it sounds hard to believe, but it really is true. And there's just simply not space. I will say what actually Lee Coffin, Leah's been really lovely with Milton and having us, we have quite a few students, including students with connections to Dartmouth apply every year. And essentially he doesn't say, oh, we can only take so many from Milton, but he says, you sent us all of your top kids and we don't have room for all of your top kids. So it's simply that you didn't do anything wrong. You did do everything right. There's just not room. And so I absolutely agree that I think the difference between the standard strong and then, so you essentially need to be a standard strong person, if you will, plus, right? And those pluses are either those hooks or everything you just mentioned, Mark, is exactly what I see. And in some ways it sounds kind of, crass to say, but I'll say this. So at Milton is a very rigorous school and English is one of its bread and butter subjects. And so the worst writer at my high school sounds like a professor at a college, honestly. So we have all these students that are going to present in very compelling ways that shows they can critically think and they're very smart and intelligent. And they have that, but it's almost like, I know they don't got it for the rest. And it's not because they're missing anything. It's just that there's this extra special piece about someone, whether it's that really compelling personal story and or like beloved by the community, but putting action into that, or these just really sort of standout scholars, as you mentioned, Mark. I had a once in a lifetime student this year and she was lovely and only applied to 2 colleges and of course got into both of them. But that she was still among very strong, smart, intelligent students with a lot to offer. That was an exception, right? She's a majority student who went to my school all her life, but she was so dang smart and kind that it really isn't replicable. That is sort of represents the top 1% of, if not less than their applicants. But or I had a student who, when they wrote their supplements, like
their intellect, somehow they were able to capture that on the page. I actually have a lot of students who I would put in that category who the college process is not the way they show their stuff, actually. And so sometimes I'll have all A+ kids who've superseded the curriculum, and they sort of are just a little matter of fact in their essays, and they don't get good news usually, even though they're arguably stronger or could contribute more than some of the other students. But you gotta have to find multiple modalities of which to show that to really stand out. So I completely agree with you, Mark, on all of the points you made. And it is a very small percentage of those students that are just like, hey, I'm in without these hooks. And so when you think about all of the people that can come to the table, all the people that are admissible, all the people that are standard strong, and then they have X many spots left over in regular, which they really would like to include, the underrepresented students that they don't catch in the early round. There is a reason the Ivy Leagues and Stanford do not allow you to apply to one another at the same time early, is that if you're a standard strong kid, you've got to be a little strategic here, even though it seems cruel, and that you've got to kind of pick where your best options are in terms of all of the great academic achievement you've gotten and all of your great extracurriculars and whatnot. But it does not do the trick at the end of the day a lot of the time. And I don't know if you feel this way, Mark, but we always say this in my profession, that that is sometimes the worst conversation to have with a student, is the standard strong student who, as we say, just misses everywhere, right? And then they feel, even though they end up at a school that its selectivity rate is between a 10 and 25%. Somehow, even though it's a great school, there's this profound feeling when you get a lot of no's from very selective places, a profound feeling of terribleness. I've seen it happen. And so I do think it's important to prepare students who are in that category for that, because honestly, it doesn't make sense. You just have to be on the other side to know that that's how it works, even though it's cruel. But if you're prepared, you're going to either have better outcomes that you're happy about, and also better mental health at the end of the day. And I will say, most of the time, my standard strong kids who did not get into one of those uber selective schools usually comes back about 3 months to 6 months later and are really happy where they are and don't feel as if, they're not with people of their caliber. Because guess what? Selectivity does not at all relate to caliber whatsoever.
Friends, this completes the first half. Hope you'll join us next week for the final part.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in the final part of Lisa's interview with Brian Bertges, Lisa asks, how can a fraternity judge whether they are successful? And Brian gives Lisa 5 areas to look for to judge if a fraternity is successful. Lisa asks what advice Brian has for students, parents, and college counselors applying to college. And Lisa closes by putting Brian on the hot seat, and Brian has a book recommendation that he says changed his life. Listen and enjoy.
How do you think students and parents can evaluate different Greek organizations on campus and decide which ones are, a good fit for them that might have offer a high quality experience?
So I would say probably you look at lag measures, right? GPA is probably one of them. What was the GPA of the new member class? What was the GPA of the brotherhood overall or sisterhood? That's always a good indicator of health of an organization, is how they're performing academically, because a fraternity should complement your academic experience, not the other way around. I think you look to see if there were any violations and what were the violations around. So if they have social violations or hazing violations, it's a good thing to look at. And I would ask them to maybe share if the chapter is willing to share the new member education program, like a written version of it, I think that's an indicator of transparency. If they're not willing to share it, I think that may be something to cause pause. Length of new member education, some organizations don't allow it. So, if you look at the organizations that don't allow it, you can research into that and ask your children, what's the new member education period like for this organization? And if they say, oh, it's 8 weeks, and the national organization has a no new member education policy, then you can, make your assessment from there. But I would always encourage them to look at what does the national fraternity do versus, not just at the local level. If it's a local organization as well versus a nationally affiliated organization, that's also an indicator that maybe why are you local? Sometimes local fraternities and sororities come out of being kicked off or the charter being removed, and they stick around and say, well, we're going to create our own fraternity then. So there's many things to kind of be aware of, but research.
So GPA, right? Looking at the new member education process, seeing how transparent the organization is, and making sure that they are affiliated with a national or international organization, as well as checking what kind of, disciplinary actions they might have received. So those would be 5 action points that people could research.
Absolutely. And if I would say, if you're looking at, the Divine Nine, historically African-American fraternities and sororities, multicultural groups as well, they tend to research a lot more on what they want to join, whereas IFC and Pan-Hellenic fraternities and sororities, they tend to just look for the social connection that they're aspiring to have.
Mm-hmm. What advice do you have for students applying to college and then after they get to college?
So I would say look for a college that meets your social and intellectual needs. I think that having a way to connect with other people is really important. And, balance, create a desires list. Do you want to be connected close to your family? Is location a priority? Is it student organizations that match your interests, and how many organizations exist? Is it looking for a social atmosphere? What do you want to have a large Greek life experience, and look at percentages associated with that? And then when you get to campus, I think it's make the campus smaller. Join groups, whether it's Greek or not. Connect to a student organization, because that will create a greater engagement for you on the campus to allow you to feel more connected. So when you do have moments, like I think about my fraternity experience, and when I was just at University of Washington, there was a brother that just talked about how he was going through a tough time, and he was able to have a brother to count on and talk through. And that was the difference between whether or not he was going to stay in school or not. Right. So get a support group that will allow you to maintain the grit to get through school. And if you don't have anybody, if you don't have a friend, you're going to end up isolating yourself. And that's the worst thing you could do. That's the worst punishment that any human can have, is isolation.
Right. Absolutely. And I think all the research about college, tells us that. What about for parents of, high school students applying to college and college students? What words of wisdom do you have for us?
I think educate them on living in integrity with themselves, right? And to search out experiences, right? The purpose of life is to have experiences and to exhibit love towards one another, right? So encourage them to get involved, and to also understand that you are in control of your decisions in your body, and nobody can take that from you, right? Don't try to just fit in. Stand up for what you believe in and who you are, because if you live integrity with yourself, that will lead to ultimate success. And tell them that it's okay to fail, right? Because I think looking at college students now, they're trying to be something. They're trying to be perfect. They're trying to be the best. And when they fail, how they handle that is rather important. So it's not a mistake, but a mistake. You can try again. So give them the authority to be who they are and to fail, because if they can't, then the pressure may be too great for them.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I feel like with social media, I feel like oftentimes college students are at 100% like performance level all the time. And, you know, I didn't have that because I'm old. So when I failed, it mostly happened on a private, personal level. But I could, you know, I didn't have to process it with everybody else. But these kids feel like they have to have like, you know, this curated, cultivated image that never fails.
And you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more, Lisa. And, you know, it's the number of likes and that they get on the posts. I didn't get enough, so I must not be that enough. And that's sad. And we can shift our conversations around effort, not around achievement.
Now, what about for college counselors? They make up a significant minority of our listeners. What advice do you have for us?
For counselors, I think it's diving into the whys. I think Simon Sinek had a great TED Talk. Why before what is what I always call it, but that's not what it is. Really diving into why people are doing what they're doing. When I worked for University of Maryland, I remember when somebody was struggling academically, I asked one veteran, "Why are you in the major that you're in?" And he said, "Well, my stepfather owns a business in computer science, and I would have this job if I stopped." And I said, "Well, what are you really passionate about, and what do you love?" And he said, "I love fire. I want to be like, I think it's so unpredictable. I think it's really, really just something like the risk associated with it." And I said, "So there's fireproof engineering, and there's also firefighter, you know, have you thought about this?" He said, "Yeah, but I don't want to let my wife down and my father-in-law." And I said, "I think you're letting yourself down, and maybe just having that conversation would be helpful." He ended up becoming a firefighter, and I ran into him at an event at University of Maryland, and he just said, "Thank you so much for giving me the authority to follow my passion." So I think sometimes college students do a major because their parents are pressuring them, but really understanding their why is the most important thing a counselor could do.
I love that story. You know, that's great. And as a college counselor, I'm like, oh, that fire essay, it could be so good. You know, like I'm always looking for essay topics these days. And if that man had written about his love of fire, that would have been, well, it would have been, as the young people say, fire. This has been great. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. But before we let you go, every guest on your College Bound Kid has to go on the hot seat, where we ask you fun questions so that our listeners can get to know you in a different way. The first question that I have for you is to tell me about a book that you've read recently that's had an impact on you.
I would say the number one book that has impacted my life is Leadership in Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute. It changed my life 100%. My wife read it as well, and it transformed our marriage. So hands down, that is the book I will always, always recommend.
Oh, so tell me the elevator pitch for that book.
It's a book about interactions with each other, and I would sum it up into saying we're mirrors of one another, and what we love in somebody else is also what we love about ourselves, and what we hate in other people is also what we hate about ourselves or may not be aware. And it's a parable format. And I would say, wow, get out of the box if you're in the box, it's not a good time.
So what do you love to do for a hobby in your free time?
What do I love to do I think it's changed over the years. If I lived up in the cold regions, I would be skiing all the time. I live down in Florida, so I would say the number one thing that I'm into right now is Spartan races. So
Like
obstacle course
Spartan.
races.
I thought you said sparkle. That's why I was confused.
Sparkle.
And also very excited. But yeah. All right, Spartan races. Yes, go on.
Yeah, so I ran, and I'm doing it a lot more with fraternity brothers from other charges. It's become an international thing for a group of us. I'm going to be going up to Killington in September, which is the world's hardest obstacle course race in the Spartan realm. And I'm doing it with about 10 fraternity brothers, my wife and some other people. So we're growing a tribe. If you're interested in doing it with me, I'm always up for new people.
I feel like I'm so clumsy that just getting out of bed is an obstacle course for me, but maybe that would improve with practice. So
yeah, I would say their motto is amazing. You'll know at the finish line, right? Don't be afraid of obstacles. Take them head on, no matter what they are, physical or mental. Let's go.
Mm-hmm. That's great. My last question for you is just about if you could do another job. Well, let's say I took this option away. What you're doing now, can't do it anymore. What would you do?
I'd run for public office.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I believe in this world that, the two-party system is failing us and that people aren't necessarily representing us, and that we have to be able to have the conversations whether or not we agree with others. And I say, it's good to speak confidently about what you believe, but hold your convictions loosely. And I feel that when people are towing the party line, it doesn't allow us to come to agreement on things that are something that could drive us forward together. And that needs to stop. And I think that the way that money influences elections is awful.
I agree. It's just, I always feel like, why can't we, all right, you disagree on all these things, but what about the things you do agree on? Can we just work on that for now? And let's just table everything else. But we could have some progress, but no, that does not seem to be happening at the moment.
Yeah.
Would you want to run at the local level, or do you have bigger dreams? What what do you see for yourself?
I want to run at the national level. I would love it. I had a dream that one day I would be president of the United States.
Wow. That would be so cool, because then I would know you.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be cool for you too, and the country, but for me, mostly for me, right?
Yeah, it's amazing, because I think that we need to have a president that's not a part of one party, Democrat or Republican. I remember Ross Perot running when I was just a teenager, and I was like, oh my God, this guy's amazing. He ended up dropping out and then coming back. I think he would have won if he would have stayed in. But I think the reason why Trump and Obama were elected was the same reason. They both represented something different.
Wow. I wish you luck in all of that. I'm sure your fraternity will miss you, though, if you do end up, getting the presidential job. But thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate all your expertise.
Lisa, you are amazing, and I just had the time of my life. So if you ever want to chat again, let's do it at a Spartan race. What do you think?
Okay. I have to Google what that is exactly before I commit. But you're the one person who could probably talk me into it, Brian. I got to be honest. You're very persuasive,
Well, we'll come together. I'll get a group of people. I mean, it's amazing. If I may share one last thing about it. Mm-hmm. I'm always inspired by the people that run the race. There's people that are wheelchair bound doing it. There are people that have amputations. There are people with other mental abilities. I was I was walking, and there was this one place at the Jacksonville race. It was like this mile to mile and a half trudge through like a swamp and or a marsh. And this guy was there with me, and I was walking him through it, and he was mentally other abilities, and he did like 3 or 4 major races.
Well, that's great.
And he's really committed to it. It's an amazing experience, transformational.
All right. Well, thank you so
All right.
much. All right.
On Thursday's episode, Julie and I will be returning to the topic of does college admissions favor the top 1% with an article by Kevin Carey that ran in The Atlantic on August 15th entitled, "These state schools also favor the top 1%. I was going to run 7 straight weeks of Julie and I interviewing Lee Coffin, the Vice Provost of Enrollment at Dartmouth College. We started out with 4 weeks on tough questions about college admissions. We were going to transition to 3 weeks of a college spotlight on Dartmouth, but we're going to come back to Lee. There's some other great voices we want you to hear. And on Thursday's episode, you'll hear my interview with Ron Lieber, the lead money writer for New York Times. And we're talking tough questions about money and paying for college, and it's a 4-part interview. A question from a listener, Julie and I talk about lopsided test scores. A SpeakPipe question came in, and it was one that challenged Julie and I. It was a student with lopsided test scores. And how do you handle a student that has one part really high and another not as high when it comes to the college application process? So we appreciate that question. You'll want to tune in Thursday for that. And for the spotlight, it'll be the last part of Kevin Newton talking about going overseas for law school. And friends, I close you with something you've heard me say 1,000,000 times over if you listen to this podcast. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. But it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Linda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Linda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.